Alright, I'm going to dive right into this one, and if you will remember a couple months ago, I made a video about Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper painting, and all of the reported Mandela effects that are related to this painting. And I mentioned you might want to keep an eye on this painting because it continues to change. And for folks who are not in this community, Mandela effect community, or scrutinizing these kinds of, iconic images, paintings, pop culture, movie lines, all this kind of stuff, this subject might land kind of flat. But for those of you who are paying attention, I want you to look closely. And if you remember my previous video, any of the details I was pointing out, start to look over the disciples here in the Last Supper. Does any one disciple seem to stand out slightly more than the others? Now, in my last video, I would have said no, because since that time and now, something has appeared to change, and one of the disciples is noticeably different in appearance. And this was not so before. Just a couple days ago, I thought, you know what? I better take another look at the Last Supper, just to keep my memory fresh on things, see if anything's changed. Immediately, something jumped out at me. And if you don't know where Judas is, you might be able to guess now just by how he is depicted in the painting. He's holding a money bag. That's one distinguishing feature. But now it appears that his skin tone is noticeably darker than the rest of the disciples. And this was not the case for me not that long ago. Of course, there's some art students out there who might stumble on this video and say, hey, I studied this a long time ago in school and nothing's changed. And that might be true for you. With the relative nature of the Mandela effect, though, other people might have wildly different experiences of many of these subjects. I am one of them. So you might want to, if you haven't seen it already, watch my first video of all the things that I pointed out that have appeared to change. And it is noticeable when you contrast the original with reproductions, common reproductions that you might see in a loved one's house, on the wall somewhere, in a church, or wherever you might see a reproduction of this painting. There are distinguishable differences between reproductions and the original, even though you can tell the reproductions are modeled after this painting by Leonardo da Vinci. But there's just so much going on. All right, so we can see that Judas now appears to be noticeably darker in skin tone, that this is new. He almost does not appear to be of the same ethnicity as the rest of the disciples here at the table. And like I said, this just leapt out at me immediately before, and I had just been scrutinizing this painting, and this feature was not there for me. I don't know if anyone else who watched my video will agree with this, but I just have to point this out and see what other people think, because maybe I missed something. But if others agree, please let me know. The other distinguishing feature now is that his left hand is open and grasping towards Jesus. Now, I highlighted this in the last video where I do not remember Jesus' right hand open and grasping like this before. It was more like his left hand. It was open, palms facing up, kind of like welcoming people to sit down at the table. That's the kind of the gesture I was getting from that. But now his hand is open and it's reaching for something. And as I was scrutinizing that gesture, I was looking at other hands on the table, and I did not see Judas' hand reaching out like this. And immediately, now that I looked at these features, I thought, I know I'm going to see what I remember in the reproductions. So other people might say, well, that's what you're remembering then. You're just remembering what you saw in a reproduction. But here's the thing. I've been scrutinizing the discrepancies between reproductions and the original, and I highlighted that in my last video, so I'm keenly aware of how reproductions and the original are different. So look at this. Here's Judas holding the money bag, and he does not look any different in skin tone than any of the rest of the disciples in this reproduction. And his left arm is held inwards. That's like I remember. That's how the original was just 2 months ago. I was pointing out all the differences between reproductions and the original, and this was not one of them. Now it is. And the other thing we're going to have to look at is also John, who is sitting next to Jesus. Look at John's right hand. It appears to be kind of touching Jesus' robe somewhat, I don't know, affectionately. I'm not sure how to describe this gesture, but it's not the way it is in the original. This is what I remember. Fingers laced together. That's what I remember of John's hand position. But now the originals seem to show a discrepancy. I mean, the reproductions seem to show a discrepancy in this hand position compared to the original. And as you can see, Peter is in the background behind Andrew, but in the original, Peter is somewhat more in front of Andrew, and he's holding a knife. So there's many of these changes, these discrepancies now between the original and the reproductions. So let's continue to look through these. There's Judas, lighter skin, hand, arm inwards. John appears to be touching Jesus. Likewise, and here John's hand looks more like a foot than a hand. You can't even see where the fingers are. There's the original. Judas does not look like I remember at all. There's Jesus and his open hand, like I was describing in the last video. And I did not remember at all Judas having his hand open and reaching towards Jesus. And this one, John looks distinctly feminine. So there's that controversy whether Da Vinci was painting Mary Magdalene instead of John sitting next to Jesus. No one really knows what Da Vinci was going for. Some of these reproductions, it's just curious to me. Now here Judas is touching Jesus, and John also seems to be perhaps touching Jesus. Maybe all three of their hands are together there. And I think many of these people are painting a reproduction modeled after the original, so the positions, gestures, all of that were meant to imitate the original, but you can see so many discrepancies now. Here, Judas and John both appear to be touching Jesus. So it makes me wonder, could the original change and reflect some of these hand positions that are in the reproductions? We might see more changes in the future. There's Judas, arm inwards, skin tone the same as the rest of the disciples. There's hands out in that one. Let's see about John. Hand out. So I don't know what you think about this. I would love to hear some feedback. Do you agree with what I am observing? Is this depiction of Judas now something new compared to what you remember? Let me know in the comments.